Hey everybody, welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe. And as always, I'm ready to dive into some seriously juicy info with you all today. It's like we're mixing up a knowledge cocktail here. Strong stuff, but oh, so smooth going down.
And I'm Sunny, your friendly neighborhood fact checker. I'll make sure we get all the ingredients right. Speaking of mixing things up, you know it's always a good blend? Travel whiskey and discovering awesome new things. You have to check out our friend Micky's YouTube channel, Mickytolife.
Yeah, Mickey's the best. He's always got something cool going on. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a story that honestly sounds like something straight out of a bio-thriller.
It really does.
We're talking smuggled biological material, international intrigue, and some pretty serious concerns about our food supply. But maybe the real story is a bit different.
That's right. We're looking into a specific case. It involves a plant pathogen, 2 individuals, and some big questions about intent, security, and frankly, how easily potentially risky stuff can move around.
Even if it's not, like, a super weapon.
Exactly. Even if it's something more mundane but still regulated.
So the goal here is to really understand what happened in this incident, the actual risks tied to this kind of material, and, what it tells us about vulnerabilities and the rules.
Yeah, the regulations in science and research. We want to get past the sort of scary headlines.
Into the details.
We'll walk you through the incident itself, who the people involved are, their scientific background, and then kind of critically examine the bigger picture.
Including that idea you see floating around about a potential man-made food crisis.
Right, or even an accidental release scenario, maybe with air quotes around accidental. We need to look at that carefully.
Okay, let's jump right in. How did this whole thing even start?
Well, it centers on 2 Chinese nationals, Yuning Gan and Zhanyang Lu.
Okay.
They were charged with conspiracy, smuggling, and making false statements, all tied to trying to bring a dangerous pathogen into the U.S.
A dangerous pathogen? What exactly was it?
The substance was a fungus. It's called Fusarium graminearum, or FG for short.
FG, yes, okay.
Now, this isn't some, totally obscure lab creation. It's actually really well known in agriculture.
But not in a good way.
Definitely not in a good way, no. Experts agree if it spreads unchecked, it's a real threat, a major threat to food crops.
And the charges even described it. How?
They described it as potentially usable for agricultural terrorism, capable of destroying crops, making people sick, making animals sick. Pretty strong language.
Wow. And when you say major crops, what are we talking about?
We're talking staples, things like barley, corn, wheat, the kind of stuff, that forms the base of the food system.
Yeah, things we rely on.
Exactly. And this FG causes a disease called head blight in these grains. It leads to huge yield losses.
Okay, so it kills the plants.
It damages them badly, yeah. But it's not just about destroying the crops themselves. It also produces these nasty toxins, things like DON, deoxynivalenol. It's a mycotoxin. If humans or animals eat grain contaminated with it, it can cause vomiting, liver damage, even reproductive problems.
Yikes, that sounds really bad.
It is. And it translates to billions, literally billions of dollars in economic losses worldwide every single year. This isn't a new problem. It's a known, persistent headache for agriculture.
Billions.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did they actually get caught trying to bring this problem fungus into the country?
So Zhanyang Lu, one of the individuals, was stopped at Detroit Metro Airport back in July 2024.
Okay, standard customs check.
Seems like it. Customs and Border Protection officers searched his bag and get this hidden inside a crumpled tissue.
A tissue? Like a Kleenex?
Apparently. Tucked in his backpack pocket, inside the tissue were 4 small plastic bags.
And inside the bags?
A small amount of this reddish-brown plant material. That was the fungus. They also found some notes in Chinese and filter paper along with it.
Wow. A crumpled tissue. That sounds incredibly low-tech and pretty sneaky.
It definitely doesn't scream official scientific transport, does it?
Not at all.
And initially, Lu apparently lied about what the material was, just flat out denied it. But later, he admitted he was smuggling it, said it was for research. He was trying to get it to the lab where his girlfriend, Yuning Gan, worked.
So he was caught, admitted it. What happened to him?
Lu was denied entry into the U.S. They sent him right back to China.
Yeah.
But Gan, his girlfriend, she was already in the U.S., and she's now facing some pretty significant charges related to this whole thing.
Okay, so that's the scene at the airport. Pretty dramatic. Let's dig a bit deeper into who these two actually are, starting with Yuning Gan, the one in the U.S.
Right. Yuning Gan is described as a 33-year-old Chinese scientist, also a student. At the time this happened, she was a postdoctoral researcher.
Working where?
At a lab at the University of Michigan.
Okay.
And what's interesting, and maybe a bit concerning, is that investigators apparently found evidence suggesting this might not have been the first time.
First time smuggling?
That she might have tried to smuggle biological material into the U.S. before this incident with Liu, so maybe a pattern.
Okay. And what about her background? Funding? Anything that adds context here?
Yeah, some details came out. She's a Chinese citizen, obviously. She got her PhD in plant pathology from Zhejiang University in China.
Okay, so specialized in this area.
Right. And notably, it's reported that her postdoc work, the research she was doing here, which included work on this specific fungus, FG, it received funding from a Chinese foundation. And that foundation is reportedly largely funded by the Chinese government.
Ah, okay, that adds a layer.
It does. And investigators also apparently found evidence, like on her electronic devices, that suggested loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party. So those elements are part of the picture investigators painted.
And we mentioned the tissue. Were there other signs they were actively trying to hide this stuff? Not just being careless, but like deliberately concealing?
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just unsophisticated. It seemed clearly secretive. Beyond the tissue in the pocket, there were messages between Gan and Liu.
Okay.
And these messages reportedly discuss other methods for hiding things, like potentially hiding items in shoes.
In shoes? Seriously?
That's what was mentioned. And this is really crucial because, look, if you need to transport biological materials for legitimate research...
There are ways to do that legally, right? Permits and stuff.
Exactly. There are established legal channels. You apply for permits from agencies like EP26, you declare it. They explicitly did not do that.
And the thinking is they skipped the permits because they didn't want the attention.
That's certainly the strong implication, yeah. It suggests they knew what they were doing would likely attract scrutiny from the very agencies designed to monitor this kind of import.
Right, so bypassing the rules points towards trying to operate completely under the radar.
Precisely. An intent to operate outside the established system.
Okay, so they're plant pathologists. They study this specific fungus. And they're trying to bring samples in secretly. Let's talk about their actual research. What were they trying to do with this fungus?
Well, their published work focuses squarely on Fusarium graminearum. That's their area. Both Gan and Liu are listed as co-authors on several research papers about it.
So they have a track record.
Gan, especially. She has a pretty substantial publication record on this topic. Several peer-reviewed papers digging into FG.
I heard about one specific paper they co-authored from 2022 that seemed particularly relevant to maybe some of the security worries.
Yes, that one is significant in this context. It came out of Zhejiang University, had several authors, including a vice president of the Chinese Phytopathological Society, a senior figure.
Okay, and what did that paper focus on?
It looked at a really key aspect of the fungus, how it resists the plant's own immune system, how it fights back when the plant tries to defend itself.
Oh.
They identified a specific gene called FG-ROB, and in some of the discussion around this case, it's been described as acting like the fungus's armor.
It's armor. Okay, I can see where this is going.
Right. It's the mechanism that helps the fungus basically shrug off the plant's defenses.
So if you're studying the armor, maybe you're thinking about how to make the armor stronger.
That's exactly where the concern comes in. This is where you get into discussions about potential enhancement, or what's sometimes called gain-of-function research.
Right.
The idea is, if you understand the gene that provides this armor, could you potentially use gene editing tools, something like CRISPR?
Which is pretty accessible now.
Increasingly so, yeah.
Yeah.
Could you use those tools to strengthen or change that FG-ROB gene? And if you did, could that theoretically make the fungus even more resistant to plant defenses, more virulent, harder to control?
And did their private messages hint they were actually trying to do that kind of manipulation?
That's what the report suggests, yes. Messages between them reportedly mention things like testing expression and the amount of protein produced by certain fungal genes.
Which sounds like...
That kind of language could certainly imply they were actively researching ways to, tweak or enhance the fungus's natural abilities, messing with how its genes work.
So it feels like this research, it could be seen in two ways, right? Yeah. Either just understanding a known enemy better.
Which is a legitimate science, yeah. You need to understand it to fight it.
Or potentially figuring out how to make that enemy even worse. And some people even speculated, maybe wildly, that the research was just a cover.
That darker interpretation definitely emerged. People threw around phrases like their real objective was Very sinister, well-planned, even suggesting they might be aiming for an accidental release scenario.
Implying the accident wouldn't be accidental at all.
Right, pushing it towards the idea of a deliberate planned attack using this fungus. That narrative was out there.
Okay, so let's tackle that head on. This dramatic idea, a man-made food crisis, or this sinister accidental release. Given everything we actually know about this specific incident, this smuggled sample, how realistic is that fear?
Yeah, that's the absolute core question, isn't it? We need to put the facts we have into perspective here. And maybe the most significant point, and it might sound a bit counterintuitive at first,
Right.
is that Fusarium graminearum, this FG fungus, it's already everywhere in the United States.
Wait, it's already here, widely.
Incredibly widespread. This isn't some exotic pathogen that we're trying to sneak in for the first time. It is common all across U.S. agricultural regions and, frankly, in temperate and subtropical zones all over the world.
Huh. Some people even think it started here.
There's speculation it might have originated in North America, yeah. So it's been a problem here for a long, long time.
Okay, so hold on. If this fungus is already here, already causing billions in damage because it's so widespread, how much more damage could one tiny amount smuggled into tissue really cause, even if it somehow got out of the lab?
That is the central point when you're evaluating the immediate risk from this specific event. Because it's already endemic, it's already in the environment.
Right.
Even if there had been an accidental release from a lab, which, let's stress, did not happen here because it was intercepted.
Thankfully.
But even if it had, the impact might have been limited because the fungus is already out there infecting crops. It wouldn't necessarily be introducing some brand new devastating threat to the whole U.S. agricultural system.
Unless.
The only way that calculation changes dramatically is if the specific sample they smuggled wasn't just regular FG, if it was a specific genetically modified strain.
Like weaponized.
Yeah.
Made significantly more dangerous.
Right. Significantly more virulent, maybe resistant to fungicides we currently use, or engineered in some other way to be much worse than the strains already circulating out in the field.
Okay. So based on what actually came out, was there any evidence that this specific sample was genetically modified, that it was some kind of super fungus?
Based on the information that's been made available, no. There is currently no public evidence suggesting the fungus they were trying to smuggle was genetically modified or specially dangerous beyond its natural, already problematic form.
And Liu himself said it was for research, not release.
That's what he reportedly stated when questioned. Yeah, for research. Now, obviously, the whole concept of dual-use research science that could be beneficial or harmful is a constant worry in biology.
Sure.
But their published work, the stuff that's out there, it looks like standard plant pathology research, trying to understand the fungus, which, again, you have to do if you want to develop better ways to control it, like resistant crop varieties. It doesn't automatically mean weaponization.
And the fact that it was stopped at the border, that's actually a pretty big deal in itself, isn't it? It never even got near the lab.
Absolutely critical point. It was intercepted at the airport. It did not reach the University of Michigan lab.
So no leak, no release from this event?
Correct. No reported leakage related to this specific incident. And while the smuggling attempt itself is absolutely serious, and it raises alarms, the fact that it was caught also highlights something else. That the U.S. border controls and biosafety mechanisms, they can work. They can be effective in stopping stuff like this from getting into sensitive environments.
That's a good point. Now, this story didn't happen in a vacuum, right? It got discussed within the broader context of worries about other countries' activities, cyber attacks, potential biological threats, that whole climate.
Definitely. That geopolitical context absolutely colors how people perceived this incident. It's been pointed out, for instance, that people trying to bring pathogens into the U.S. is actually rarer than researchers trying to take sensitive materials out.
Interesting.
And the fact that the FBI and DOJ used that phrase, potential agroterrorism weapon, that definitely reflects the heightened national security concerns right now and the, let's say, sensitive relationship between the U.S. and China. However, again, you have some experts cautioning that framing the threat from this specific fungus as an imminent bioweapon might be overstating it, precisely because it's already so common here.
So their argument would be the main concern is more about the rule breaking, the intent.
Exactly. More about the intent to bypass crucial safety regulations, the questions about funding and potential long-term research goals, rather than an immediate catastrophic crop failure triggered by this one little baggie they caught.
Gotcha. And the University of Michigan, where Gann worked, they commented too.
They did. They issued a statement basically condemning any actions that could cause harm or threaten national security. Standard institutional response.
Did they address the funding part?
Yes, they specifically stated that they, the university, did not receive Chinese government funding related to GAN's research, addressing that particular angle directly.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up, distill it down. We have a clear case, right? 2 researchers charged with serious crimes.
Very serious federal charges, yes.
Yeah.
Conspiracy, smuggling, false statements.
For trying to secretly bring a known plant pathogen into the U.S., deliberately skipping all the safety rules and import regulations.
Correct. Bypassing the established protocols entirely.
And their background is specifically in studying this fungus. Their private messages suggest they were looking into its genetics, like that armor gene.
Which could potentially relate to research exploring how to enhance its abilities, yes. That possibility exists based on the language reportedly used.
But, and this seems like a really big but, based on the facts of this incident, there's no evidence this specific sample was modified into a superweapon.
No public evidence of that, no.
There was no release, no leak from this event because it was caught.
Correct. Intercepted at the border.
And the fungus itself, while nasty, is already a huge agricultural problem, widespread across the U.S. anyway.
Yes, it's an existing endemic issue.
So, putting it all together, that idea of a man-made food crisis being triggered by this specific smuggling attempt seems unlikely, based on these facts.
Based on the nature of the fungus and its current prevalence, a widespread crisis caused directly by this intercepted sample seems unlikely, yes. But the incident itself is still a significant violation.
Right. It's the attempt and what it represents.
Exactly. It raises really valid, really important security questions about researchers coming from certain countries, about how research gets funded, about how we track biological materials in a world where science is so interconnected.
And that potential for dual-use science, right?
Yeah.
Good intentions, bad outcomes.
Especially in the current geopolitical climate, yes. It absolutely underscores why we need vigilance. Why we need strict adherence to international regulations when it comes to moving potentially harmful biological materials. The rules are there for a reason.
Wow. Okay, so that's our deep dive into a situation that, grabbed headlines, definitely sounded alarming. But the real story seems maybe less about a comic book supervillain fungus.
Right.
And maybe more about this really tricky, complex intersection of science, international relations, security protocols, and the potential risks involved. It really makes you think about all the unseen stuff, the regulations and checks that are supposed to keep things safe.
It really does. And it leaves us, and maybe you listening, with a really significant ongoing question. It's something the scientific community and governments are constantly wrestling with.
Which is?
As global science keeps collaborating more and more, which is generally a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And as moving biological materials around is just flat out necessary for progress, like developing better crops, finding cures for diseases.
Yeah, you need samples to study.
You absolutely do. So how do we effectively balance that need? The need for open research, for sharing knowledge freely? How do we balance that with the absolute critical need to prevent misuse, to prevent accidental releases, deliberate attacks, and just generally ensure national and global security?
That sounds like a balancing act with incredibly high stakes.
Huge stakes. Finding that right balance is maybe one of the biggest challenges in this area going forward.